Well, the point of this chapter is the question is why study history? As you can see, the study of history is a very complex issue. It's a very complex issue, but it's one that is necessary for us to understand. In this picture here, you see George Washington crossing the Delaware. We know he did cross the Delaware from diary entries and other sources, and that is the point of this chapter, for you to understand how do we come up with history? How do we come to these stories that we put them together? At the bottom here, you see immigrants who are marching for rights and respect. We need to also understand why they come here in the first place. And through history, we can study the factors as to why they leave their homeland, not because they want to, but because it's a necessity. And then finally, what is going on in our country today with the protests against police brutality, and as well as the drive for racial justice and equality. This is something that did not appear overnight, but rather has been ongoing for decades. So at a moment like this in our history, it is very important that we study history and we look in the past to understand exactly where we are and why we are here. And we as human beings, where do we belong in this country? For this first chapter, we're going to kind of look at, why study history again, understanding how we get to history. This is the image of Iwo Jima. Why did the soldiers fight in the Pacific and in Europe during World War II? Obviously to stop the rise of fascism, of Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo in Japan with the militarism. But you as a historian, you are a historian. A historian is a writer, a student, or a scholar of history. It doesn't necessarily get to write a book, but rather it's one who writes and compiles a record of events, a chronicler. And that is you. You are that with your family history. When you are asked to talk about your family history, you are bringing that history to other people. You are a historian. As a son of Mexican immigrants, I bring that factor into my life and to others when I tell them my story. Our vocabulary. Some of the first terms we're going to see in this first chapter are going to be evidence. The historians use this to reconstruct the past. Evidence is important information that can be used to prove a statement or support a conclusion. Primary source. A document or other record of past events created by someone who was present during the event or at the time period when it occurred. A newspaper article, a video now of that time, of that moment, a diary entry, anything from that moment that can help explain to historians or to anyone what was going on. A secondary source is a document or other record of past events created by someone who was not present during the events or the time period in which they occurred. That could be your book, our textbook that we'll be using, our online book, any of those things that are written after the fact. In point of view, it's a person's way of thinking about or approaching a subject as shaped by his or her character, experience, culture, and history. This is a very important term as we go through this history course of understanding other people's points of views and understanding where they're coming from. And it's evidence today when we talk about certain issues such as immigration or what's going on with Black Lives Matter. There's some people who will agree and there's going to be people who are going to be against it. And it's their point of view and it's shaped by their history and where they grew up from. And then finally, biases. It's a personal leaning or a preference for a particular outlook. And all of us must recognize that we all have biases. All of us, whether it's baseball or sports teams or more serious issues such as racial justice or immigration, all that. All of us have some bias in all this. And that will be the goal for today's